All right, we are recording, and this is another of our series of oral history interviews for the IAPC. And today we're very happy to be interviewing Terry Allen, and who's had a long involvement with Philosophy for Children and the IAPC. And I have a few very basic questions prepared, Terry, that I'll ask, having gone back and looked at some of your stuff. And Megan's just going to pop in and ask follow-up questions. But whatever you want to share, please do. All right.
All right.
And I thought we'd just start with, I know you got a master's degree with at Montclair, but where was your undergraduate degree and what was that in?
Yes, we were out in Oregon, and it was Oregon College of Education,
Hmm.
and 68, 69. And then I got a master's degree in teaching there also before we came out to. And
Okay.
it was doing the work for the master's degree that I took a course in teaching philosophy to children with Dale Cannon.
Yeah. So I knew Dale pretty well. Tell us about that. Can you tell us about the course and about working with Dale? Anything you remember?
Well, I remember that at that time in my career, I realized that teaching, I enjoyed teaching, but that many students teaching the educational process could be a little discouraging for kids as they get
Hmm.
labeled and categorized. And when I took this course in teaching philosophy to children, I realized, oh wow, it's so encouraging to children to get them to talking about their ideas and giving reasons for what they think. And so it was really a find for me to come upon a method of teaching that I felt was very encouraging. And I took a couple of classes from Dale, but this was the one that launched an article for Thinking Magazine, a couple of articles actually, in the late 80s.
Nice. And so were I assume you were teaching during the degree program? You were already a school teacher, right?
Yes, I'd been teaching for a number of years,
Okay.
about
Where
20
were
years.
you? Where were you? Oh, wow. Where were you teaching in Oregon?
I taught in a little country school first
Hmm.
10 years, 11 years, out in the rural country around Salem, Oregon. And
Wow.
uh,
Beautiful.
yep. And then I started teaching at a Christian school, Salem Academy,
Hmm.
right in Salem, Oregon.
Oh,
And I was there 10 years. And
wow.
then upon hearing about this program, and I got in touch. Matter of fact, one of the colleagues at Salem Academy had graduated from Eastern Christian
Hmm.
in North Haledon, New Jersey at that time. And so I had wanted to take the course with Matt in 1990. We moved out here to take that course and to get a master's degree in teaching philosophy for children
Ah,
because of the stimulus of the course I had taken with Dale. And I was able to get a job teaching. I would have to teach and support us while I went to school to university. So I applied. I was accepted in the Philosophy for Children program. I went to the Minden program in 1990 that summer, and I started teaching at Eastern Christian 35 years ago. Uh, uh, there it was in Wyckoff, a place called Wyckoff, New Jersey,
yeah.
about 15 miles west of the city.
Wow.
And the school that I taught in, Eastern Christian, they knew that I was taking a course in teaching philosophy. And
Oh,
so they actually helped fund a couple of my classes, and they were pretty open to my approach. Uh, Teaching is always a matter of trust. So
hmm.
when they realize, oh, you're teaching philosophy to middle school kids, what does that mean? What does that look like? Uh,
Yeah.
then I convinced them I wasn't really teaching philosophy; I was teaching philosophically.
Right.
And so it, and then they looked at some of my classes, and the kids were really receptive. They were in Salem also,
Hmm.
where I really implemented that program. Kids are so open to asking questions, to dialogue, and
I was going to ask about that. When did you start using philosophy in your own classroom? So I guess it was in Oregon, right? While you were working with Dale?
Yep, it would have been about 1988 is when
Hmm.
I first.
Hmm.
And then I used it was the curriculum implementation part of getting the master's. So I used that experience for teaching philosophy for children. It was an article in Thinking magazine where I
Hmm.
wrote up the results of that.
Nice.
And then I wrote another article, I Think, Therefore I Can. Uh, it had to do with attribution.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's when I got started back there.
And were you using the IPC, like the Lipman novels, or something else to do the philosophy in your schools?
I used Harry Stottlemyre,
Hmm.
the sixth grade classroom I had that I implemented it to.
Hmm.
And I've used it off and on quite a bit through the years, different chapters,
Yeah.
but it's mostly and I had the volumes with the philosophical papers that Matt had developed, the like the curriculum activities and so forth.
Right.
And so I used a lot of that work from Lipman in my teaching,
Hmm.
mostly Harry Stottlemyre, a little bit from Suki. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Did you do and this is like both in Oregon and then in New Jersey. Did you do philosophy as like its own subject matter, like now we're going to do philosophy time, or was it sort of spread out
Yeah.
in other areas?
At first, it was just implemented into my classrooms. I taught two main subjects in when I started in New Jersey. Later on, I started teaching American history
Hmm.
at Eastern Christian, and but there were several years where they actually gave me a block of time, which 20 to 30 minutes a day, three times a week or so, where I only did philosophy with kids,
Hmm.
and that was
Wow.
that was the in 2005. My dissertation was on that experience,
Yeah. Okay.
worldview discovery with kids.
Right.
It used the kind of technique and uh,
Mhm.
style of teaching, the pedagogy that I
Yeah.
had learned and developed with philosophy for children.
And you called it philosophy? Like the kids knew they were doing philosophy?
Yes, yes, yes.
Wait.
And they were doing philosophy, not being taught philosophy.
Right. Nice. Nice. Okay. Can you tell us what you remember about like your first Mendham experience as a master's student? People have very different experiences there at Mendham. So let me just say, Mendham is the town in New Jersey where there's a retreat house where the IPC runs this residential course for how many weeks was it when you were there? 3 or 2?
Uh,
Probably 3.
One of those, yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
and
International visiting scholars along with master's students and then doctoral students. You were also a doctoral student later. Yeah. So what do you remember about Mendham?
oh, it was actually a rather joyful, fantastic experience. I never sat with a group of adults who really like to think and think philosophically and ask questions, and then I got to ask my questions, and so we just talked a great deal about matters of importance, and so it was a wonderful experience. Ralph Reed was there, talking with children. That book,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I remember that book.
Ron Reed? Yeah.
Ron Reed, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So no, I enjoyed learning the technique, and of course we had to sometimes we had to run the class ourselves. So it was a great introduction to the whole process.
Mm.
I enjoyed it. There was a lot of mutual respect. Everybody was really positive and committed to this idea that it's very important for kids to develop the ability to think for themselves and give reasons for what they believe.
Nice.
Do you remember the other students in your cohort who started with you in the masters? program that year?
Not very many. There's a few I can remember, and I still have some of their papers. I'm kind of going through
Wow.
all of my papers, but I didn't keep very many, and I don't know that but we wrote, we wrote papers on every chapter. So when I got into the master's program, but so no, I don't. And I did have contact with James Heinig for a long time because he was there, and as a matter of fact, he was kind of one of my mentors in the program from 1990 to 1992. I wrote some of my, he graded a lot of my papers and wrote comments and so forth. So James, and he's the one person that I really continued having contact with over the years. Yeah.
He remembers you too. We interviewed him recently, and he remembers you fondly.
Okay, cool, very cool. Yeah.
And let me just say about papers, Terry, if you have any papers like that you're thinking of throwing away, please don't. Please let us have them for the archive.
Okay. I do have a stack of Thinking magazines. Do you want them?
Thinking we have, and we've digitized it all now, so it's all up online. So yeah.
Okay, I don't need to parcel.
But if you're going to throw them away, yeah, we'll take them. Absolutely.
Okay.
Can you we're interested in you just remarked on writing a paper every week or papers on every chapter of the novels. What else can you tell us about the coursework? What else do you remember about the master's courses? Do you remember, our impression is that Anne did most of the teaching of the Philosophy for Children courses, and did Matt Lipman teach any of them?
Oh, he was in on a great deal of the discussions. He was part of that circle. And so he was often there and would participate. He would join right in, like they did. And so, but Anne and Matt did most of the teaching. Phil Cam, he did some of the teaching.
Oh, Phil Cam was there. Okay.
But in that sense, also we taught each other. We each had. But another thing that was interesting to me, because I had been I was an elementary teacher, a middle school teacher, so I'd never had much philosophy at all. So when we first came out here, I actually audited some philosophy classes at William Patterson University in the evenings, just to give me some background in philosophy.
Yeah.
And and through Matt's his own books like Thinking and so forth, I was always running into people I hadn't heard much about. So it was a great opportunity for learning. My learning curve in philosophy period was really enriching. So
wow.
And so I was in a 2-year cohort. It took me 2 years to get the master's. And there's a couple of people I could remember their names, but I lost contact with them because I got the master's program, and then there was a hiatus there of about 10 years before they started developing the doctoral program.
Right.
And I came back in at that time, early 2000s. And it was all new people by then. It was a whole new cohort of people.
Yeah. What do you remember about Matt and Anne as either as teachers or just as personalities?
Open, accepting, committed, generous in their comments for the most time. I think I come from a little more conservative background, maybe Christian, religious, and so Matt and I had I think I irritated him a little bit, but not that much, because I might push back on a few issues, but there was never any real argument. I really felt accepted. I felt a lot of freedom I didn't need to preach at anybody, and they didn't need to preach at me. So,
Nice.
to me, it was always an enriching experience, even when teaching in the school that I taught in. There's
Hmm.
really no threat. Really aren't any forbidden questions. And in that sense, we always need to be open to being able to express why we believe what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the subjects weren't even in those areas at all. So,
Mm.
and probably was a little more open in some ways, more wide ranging, but no, Matt was very open to sharing his experiences and listening to mine and treating everybody the same. So it was a good experience. Yeah.
Nice.
I never felt any antagonism there.
That's great.
And were you you were working full time then, Terry? Is that right?
I was teaching full time, yeah.
So
And
so you didn't get placed in schools to do philosophy for children as part of the master's degree. You were able to do it in your own school.
I did it in my own classroom. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I know since then there's, the do you remember a fellow named Eugenio?
Oh, yes, very well.
Okay. He was a cool guy. Again, very open and affable,
Mm-hmm.
So there were people, and then I went to Graz in 1992. There was an IAPC there, and I remember some of the folks there. I went to Madrid once too. I went to Madrid once and to Graz. So I was always surrounded by people who liked philosophy and liked to think and weren't threatened by my position, and I wasn't threatened by theirs. So because there were so many things to talk about and wonder about, period.
Yeah. Well, I think it's remarkable that you say that you talk about the lack of preaching and the lack of antagonism around philosophical and religious issues. It seems to me that, like I just came from a conference, a philosophy conference, American philosophy, and there was quite a bit of antagonism, not to do with religious beliefs, but philosophical beliefs, philosophical commitments in the room. People with very different philosophical worldviews and commitments in the room, and how quickly that can lead into some kind of antagonism. So I think it's quite a tribute what you're saying to the program. I was going to ask you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if you approach philosophy as you're wondering, why in the world does this person make that claim? Take a fellow like Rorty, okay, or Nietzsche. But so I so enjoyed getting into their great writings because I thought they're making some truth claims here, and so I want to know what's the basis. What are they basing it on? And I do the same thing with kids. What? Even as something as innocuous as was Lincoln a great leader? And so you spend a lot of time talking about what you mean by great, and does everybody think he's great? And then one time a student said, "Well, I know you think he's great, but I really haven't studied him that much yet." So there's this openness. If you don't try to press other people into your way of thinking, and you keep trying to understand what are they basing their claims on, and so yeah, I can do battle with people, and in my mind, but I want to make sure that if I say what so and so believes, that it's correct, and yeah, so there was a lot of philosophy. So it wasn't just doing philosophy. When I'm with the people I'm taking classes with, we're actually talking about philosophers and why we can or cannot accept what they said. And that comes out in the book I wrote. So also.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that in just a bit. I just want to go back to what you said about the conferences in Graz.
Mhm.
Madrid. I knew that you had been to Madrid. You gave a paper there on parents, involving parents with philosophy and their children.
Child shall lead them, right?
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the early concerns of Matt was that the work done in teaching philosophy for children in the classroom didn't really carry over into their lives when they went home and back into their communities. So, and I realized if you could get that kind of conversation going at home, that some of the inclination to think through what you believe and why you believe it would be more long lasting. So I actually taught a class of parents in my school at Eastern Christian. Ron Reed's book, Talking with Children. We went through all the chapters. And so.
That's a class you developed and invited parents to?
Yeah, quite a few parents came.
Fantastic.
But they were interested in what I was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is sort of.
How did that go?
Oh, it's very positive. I did. We read the chapters. They asked the questions, and we ran it like a community of inquiry.
Wow.
Do
you have like a syllabus or an outline of that course? I'd love to see it.
No, not really.
Okay.
I'm not very good at making syllabuses. So I'm not.
That's not a bad thing to be.
But the syllabus was, you read this chapter, and then what do you think, and what questions do you have, and then we're going to talk about what you think about it. So it was a
great idea.
The parents liked it too.
And do you think those parents, were they then having conversations with their children at home the way that you were intending?
I wouldn't know how extensive that influence was. No.
How about you? Did you have those kinds of conversations with your own children?
Oh yes, yeah. We were always talking. We read the Bible a lot, but we also talked about, well, what does it mean, and how does this apply, and why do you believe this? In the end, people make their own choices. So it's not about indoctrination. It can't really be about indoctrination. People have to try to understand what it is you're saying and whether or not they can accept it and why. So yeah, I think
that's actually the next thing I was going to ask you about, Terry. I want to share my screen for just 1 second and show, so we get this on the. Nope, that's the wrong one. All right.
I saw that.
That's all right. That's my list of questions. This one. So the Hackensack record. Well, I don't know if this was an interview, because it's all your words in '94.
Yeah, I think it was an interview. I didn't write all of that, I don't think. I didn't write the article.
It's all in your voice, and at the end it says, "As told to Patrick somebody."
Okay. Well, I read it over, but well, go ahead anyway. I don't think I wrote it.
I thoroughly enjoyed. It just talks about your experience and why you're doing philosophy, and but you do say in here that this is what I want to ask you about. It's so interesting, and you kind of already said it. Oops. That you say that in a conservative context, it's especially important if people are committed to a set of beliefs. You want children to ask lots of questions of their own, and you want them to think and discuss, so that it's not, the education is not indoctrination, and so that children can defend their own beliefs.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Say a little bit more about that?
Oh, yes. Well, in terms of our anthropology, as human beings, let's say we're made in God's image, and we have creativity, we ask questions, we make decisions, and we have a sense of responsibility for ourselves. So in that setting, all human beings have a vested interest in wondering about what Heidegger called the horizon of temporality, right? And so Heidegger's one I really enjoy reading, even though I think he failed to stand up at the right time during the Holocaust situation, but that's another story. But you see, he asked questions about being with a big B,
With a capital B, yeah.
the small b. So yeah. So I think that's true of all of us.
Mm.
If we're honest, and that's part of the wonder of philosophy, that only as human beings we are asked those questions, and so therefore it's important that we have the freedom to not only ask the questions but develop reasons why we think that's legitimate or appropriate or plausible. Because otherwise, it's just sort of a matter of indoctrination. Although my experience is that kids are going to think for themselves anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's in our DNA.
Yeah.
So to speak. But we get a chance as teachers to encourage them to think well for themselves.
That's different, isn't it? Yeah. I think that's really important to have you say that, just because on the one hand, I've run into it, especially I remember working in Savannah, Georgia, run into religious parents who worried that either philosophy or critical thinking or the combination would be somehow detrimental to their children's faith. And we won most of them over by just showing them what we do. But there have been other instances where, philosophy for children has not been allowed in schools for those reasons. And on the other hand, there's been a lot of work in the last, I'd say especially in the last 20 years on using philosophy in religious education. So like Jen Glasser has this great program in Jewish education, and at Hannam in England has been writing about in the British religious education system using philosophy. So I think that's so important.
Well, you see, the thing that I think is important is that philosophy for children is not a means to an end. It's an end in itself. And so, in other words, I'm not trying to use the program per se as a means of making sure people believe a certain way. Because the process of asking people to develop their voices and to develop reasons for what they believe, that is an end in itself, even if they don't end up believing as you do. It has to be that open. It's the same thing with Matt, the New Jersey test of reasoning skills. It always seemed to me like we were teaching to the test, but and so they were creating a lot of statistics and so forth about. But of course, you're teaching them all know, some are not, and then you go to the test, and that's what it is. So, but they were using that as a justification for putting philosophy in schools.
Yeah.
So they were using a quantitative measure to convince people, hey, this is good for people's reasoning. But that's giving it that's treating it as a means to an end instead of. But you don't often come across educators who value that in and of itself, you see, because you're creating persons. You're developing persons and not just achieving a particular quantitative measure.
That's very well said. Thank you. And I think that let's talk about your dissertation, because I think that was central, right, to what you were doing and I have another screen to share. So as you know, I'm sure, but I want to put it on record here. All the dissertations from our program are now up online, and they're accessible from the IAP website. So here's yours.
Cool.
Finished in 2005, exploring worldview perspectives with 8 grade students, criteria mapping as a method of value discovery and worldview discovery. So can you tell us a little bit about your dissertation?
Yeah, the dissertation was a way of expressing what it's like to help people develop an understanding of their own worldview. So, William James used to like to say that the good of an idea is where it leads, its consequences. But I was thinking, but the nature of an idea depends on where it started. Where did you get the idea in the first place?
Mm.
So you search it back to its origins through a series of questions. So I would be more interested at that point in the origin of the idea rather than its ultimate consequence, because whether or not the consequences are acceptable to you depends upon your values, and that depends upon your worldview. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So by asking a series of questions, I could help anyone who wants to dialogue with me. Well, what is it you really value? Why do you think Lincoln is such an important person, for example? Why do you think the invention of the printing press was such an important invention? And so you could try to, which maybe the Catholic Church at that time didn't, you see, because it was useful to spread out all these ideas that they didn't want the world to think about, or have the Bible in people's own language, you see. So there's this, that's an aside, but I'm studying the Reformation with 7th graders right now. So
Nice.
so it's the idea that I tried to develop a method, I guess you could call it a method of helping people discover what their ultimate beliefs are. Yeah.
And in this case, the people were your 8th grade students. You were helping them do that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And tell us what criteria mapping is and how did that figure in? Because you did an empirical study. Can you just describe the empirical study for us?
Yeah. Wow. I had this group of kids, 11 or so of them, for almost a whole semester, and we did philosophy 3 times a week.
Wow.
And so then I needed some kinds of questions to develop. So oddly enough, I came across this list of questions in Times Square, 1999 to 2000. And the question was, here's one of the questions. Who was the greatest person of the last millennium? Okay. So that's one of the questions. Or what is your greatest hope in the coming millennium? So those kinds of questions, I had a series of them. And so then I would take a certain number of weeks on each question. And so what was my end in view? My end in view was to use those questions as a cache of ideas to ask questions in order to get them to, in order to develop the possibility of saying, this is why I value. So here's, for example, why do you think Lincoln is important? Well, he ended slavery, or helped to end slavery. So then why do you think, what do you think of slavery, and why do you think that was important? And well, because slavery is making the property of people. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, because each people are created, say, in God's image, and they deserve a chance to have the freedom to think for themselves. Or you could take it, somebody might say, well, I'm glad he ended slavery because slavery was a very inefficient way of running an economy, and you could take it that direction. But so again, I guess my basic premise is I wanted students to be able to articulate what they believed and why they believed it. And so I was trying to give them practice in developing that capacity, the willingness to ask questions of any assertion or claim that they might make. And in the meantime, to learn how to talk in community, and to actually learn to listen to other people, to accurately assess what other people have said. And so this whole concept of philosophy for children, the whole community of inquiry, was important as well. So does that help to answer the question?
Yeah. So I just want to follow up on the criteria mapping. So it sounds like the answers that you were just, the examples you just gave about why was Lincoln important and what's wrong with slavery, were those the criteria? that got mapped?
Yeah, that was the issue. You start with an issue, and then you try to get to where you can't. It's like you get to the bedrock.
I see.
Wittgenstein. You get to the
Right.
you can't say anymore. I believe this because I believe it, and so this is or like you get to Luther. This is where I stand.
Okay.
So
So the map is kind of going backwards to get to that bedrock.
yes, you're going upstream. You're going away from the immediate consequence back to the source
Hmm.
of that belief, if possible.
And the students were making their own maps of their own view on
Yes.
something?
Yes.
I see. Wow.
And
And
we're
did
doing a lot
you
of it in dialogue.
find, Terry, did you find that they were able to do that? Did you find that they had world views that they could get to the bedrock? Or was it more the process of doing it that you were more interested in, that they were able to kind of engage in that sort of inquiry and dialogue together?
Yeah, what the process in that case, the process was the means to the end, I guess, of being able to articulate this is why I value my mother so much. And this is why I think this particular kind of government is one of the best. Or this is why I think Lincoln was a great person. Or this is why one day I hope to be an architect. So, and it's not like it's fixed. You see, you might we've all changed our attitude towards certain things and certain people. And in fact, sometimes we come to value things we didn't once value and so forth. So it's not a matter of coming to a fixed. Well, some of it will be, yeah. What are your basic values? If let's take a philosopher like Rorty. He starts with a randomness. What's the word he uses? Anyway, he starts, what now? Yeah, contingency. Yeah, and so and he makes this claim: everything's contingent, and that's the bottom line for him. So he really justifies the articulation of his philosophy on that basis. There isn't a possibility of a God, a creator, an actual purpose that we don't create ourselves, you see. So if I know that's where he's coming from, then that helps me articulate what it is he's trying to say. Or it also helps me to understand why I really can't go there. Same thing with Heidegger. If I try to understand, well, what the anti-Semitism aspect of it, where does that come from? How did he get it? Oh, he started off as a Jesuit, I think, and
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah. Well, he went to school. He wasn't a priest.
Okay. I was like, wow, that's a big piece of information.
He wasn't a priest. Sorry. He started off in that kind of school, but he ended up pretty much an atheist, I think. So what difference does that make? It just helps me understand that when he talks about the horizon of temporality and authenticity, he means you have to accept your final end, that there's no afterlife. Okay, I think that's what he would say. Okay, so but the concept of accepting my temporality, that's a very rich concept, and to not be able to do that would be to be in some ways inauthentic. Now, so why am I saying this? Because those are fixed claims. A person, well, they might be fixed claims. In other words, there isn't any claim that shouldn't be open to reevaluation. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So if one day I find out something about Lincoln that I never knew about that causes me to moderate my admiration of him, then that's different than someday I find some reason for not believing in heaven. Okay. Which, what I'm claiming is that some sources, the source of a river is where it begins, right? Yeah. Some sources might be more malleable than others. That's all. But it doesn't really matter, because if you've been able to learn and gain what Matt Lipman would call the disposition to ask questions and to pursue meaning for yourself and others, then that has value in and of itself because of our anthropology. That's who we are as people.
But your dissertation showed, didn't it, that these eighth graders were able to clarify their own worldviews?
Absolutely.
Talking about, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well,
and to have, and to see themselves as having this relationship to those worldviews of, this is something I have taken on, I have chosen, and now I'm more clear about it, but I have this, it can be reevaluated, I can ask questions about it. It's like an ongoing thing, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I guess, and part of that goes back to the very beginning of my relationship with philosophy for children, is because when kids begin to have more confidence in themselves as thinkers, yeah, this is at the very beginning, back with Dale Cannon, I realized when kids begin to have confidence in themselves as thinkers, when I was teaching, doing philosophy with kids there in Salem, and the C kid or the D kid, if you want to categorize it that way, could compete, quote unquote, or participate in a philosophy class on a par with everybody else, you see. So, and that's still true. And so when people gain a sense of confidence in themselves as thinkers, they're more likely to think for themselves.
That's nice.
Because they believe they attribute that possibility to themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think the other thing on my dissertation is that and I've already actually spoken about it, is that you can't use a method like P4C as a guarantee that people will believe a certain thing. I mean, if my students came out of my American history class not valuing democracy, I would be disappointed. But I would have to say, well, I hope you have good reasons for, believing that socialism or communism is best. I don't think they would, but I'm not telling them what to believe. I should not be telling them what to believe. And Max Weber, he says it's easy to get people to be quiet if they know that you have the ultimate ability to give them a grade or not. So when you go into the classroom, you need to go in as a philosopher. I think he would value that in some settings anyway. You need to go in as somebody who doesn't have all the answers, and of course, emblazoned across the brick building at Oregon College of Education is those who teach must never cease to learn. So I'm sure you have found the same things in your all through your experience as college professors.
Did you go ahead, Megan?
I was just wanting to ask another question about the dissertation before we move away from that topic. Just wondering how it was like to work with David Kennedy, because he wasn't there, I don't think, when you were a master's student and you chose to work with him as your dissertation chair or sponsor. And just wondered how that went, what he was like as a teacher, because you would have, I imagine, had courses with him in the doctoral program.
How's he doing, by the way? Is he retired? Is he in good health or? Okay, good, cool.
Yeah, he is in pretty good health.
All right, tell him hi for me if you see him.
Will do.
Yeah, okay. No, I took a couple of courses from him, and we had a sort of common worldview in some areas. There was an affinity between his worldview and mine that we could dialogue with openly. And so he politically no, but religiously yes. We could definitely dialogue with some sort of empathy, and
Nice.
I trusted him, and I think he gave me the enough of a leash, to think for myself without chastising me, except if I use self-reference too much. He said, "You got to stop talking about yourself so much." Okay, but don't keep starting your sentences with "I believe." So it was good, and so yeah, he was very good to work with, very open, very affable, very friendly. But also the professor-student relationship was maintained good enough so that I could learn from him, and he didn't expect me to believe just like he did, and vice versa. So no, I did enjoy working with him a lot.
Thank you.
Did you just mentioned something about we've all learned from our students? Do you remember anything in specific or time when your student doing philosophy with your students gave you new ideas or changed the way you thought about something?
Well, yeah. Well, almost weekly, kids would have a perspective different than my own on some issues, but something very simple like with one class, I said, "Okay, who do you think was the greatest person in the world?" And one of the kids says, "Well, there is no greatest person in the world." So it forced me to change my dialogue. Well, and okay, I might say, "Okay, now in my context, who do you think was the greatest person in the world, other than Jesus?" All right, and so. But then he would say, "No, there is no greatest person," and there. So that's just the thing that pops out at me. That's one of the most graphic things. The other is that, okay, the girl who said, "Well, I know, Mr. Allen, you really admire Lincoln, but I'm not sure yet that I don't know enough." And so I learned that I tend to be a fairly verbal person, and so in certain situations, and I make assumptions about what I think other people think I'm thinking. And so it was a real, to me, an awakening moment when I realized I could stand up here and give you several lectures on the greatness of Lincoln, but you might not be convinced. And I'm only using him as a meme. Yeah. And I really won't know what you think about him until I give you a chance to talk about him yourself. So that's what I mean by teachable learning moments.
Mm-hmm. It's a real testament to you that she could say that to you that directly. That's remarkable, I think. She trusted you enough.
Yeah, that's the kind of openness we should have with our students, I think, as long as there's always a tension there, about, I mean, why would I expect them to believe what I say?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, if I can't back it up.
Yeah.
And,
well, and in particular regarding values and worldviews, as opposed to like historical facts or scientific facts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and
even then,
on that latter, yeah, the kids know a lot more than I do about certain things.
Right.
How about the computers, the digital world,
Absolutely.
Did you ever have to give your students grades for philosophy, like either in Oregon or in New Jersey? Did you have to evaluate them in some way?
No, I didn't.
Nice.
In the dissertation, I did give a pre and post test, which was self-evaluation, in terms of their participation in the community of inquiry. But no, they weren't. It wasn't part of the curriculum in that way.
Okay.
Although I did. Matt did a lot with Aristotelian logic, and So when I taught logic, I would give them logic tests and I would give them letter grades on that, but not on the not on philosophical.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Forgot I was going to ask it next. Well, let me go back to.
I have two questions.
Oh, yeah, please.
One is our comment. You know, France. Did you ever try to implement philosophy for children in France?
No, I haven't, but other people have. Go ahead, Megan. Do you want more?
I was just going to say the IAPC has had a long-standing presence in France through Anne. That was my understanding, but I could be wrong. I mean, I visited France with her once, and she seemed to have. I mean, France is interesting because it had people who were. I mean, it just has had a much longer tradition of doing philosophy with young people. And so I think there were already people there who had their own approach to doing philosophy with children. But I think the IAPC had a presence there, was my understanding, and that these different approaches were all in dialogue with each other. And the conference I went to with her was a little bit like that. People would get up and talk about their approach, defend their approach, criticize other approaches. And it was felt to be a very generative environment for all involved. But other than that, I don't know the specifics. Morn probably knows the specifics
I
better.
don't really.
Well, here's my reason for asking the question is we have adult grandkids in France.
Oh, wow.
They went through the French system and their experience was they don't ask a lot of questions in class. They have a state mandated curriculum and they have to pass certain tests in order to go on to the next level, that kind of thing. So they do teach philosophy, but they teach philosophers what different people believe, the history of philosophy, so to speak. Yeah. So there are some places, but Austria was different. When we went to Graz, that conference in Graz, Daniela Cami, is that her name? Yeah. There's a group there that seemed to value the philosophical method of teaching, that there seemed to be more of an openness in that community, but they weren't a community of Austrian educators, so I don't actually know how they did it in their schools. But the whole time I was in philosophy for children, I didn't hear too much about philosophy of children programs in France, and I thought it might be because their approach to education was very different than the free West, so to speak, even though they are West. But where we tend to, in our country, value a lot of openness and asking questions, and except the more the federal government got involved in, you have to have these quantitative measures. You know, you have so math and science, and they get a lot of the press. So the concept, and yeah, so the concept of just teaching philosophy because you're trying to develop human beings who want to think for themselves and gain a voice for themselves, that's not always valued as much in some places. But okay, so the other thing was the philosophy, and then maybe this goes back to the other thing we were talking about, is that it depends on who's doing it. Even teachers of philosophy for children can have a bias.
Oh, yeah.
And so let's take something as innocuous as climate change. You know, there are many adults you can't talk about climate change with them. They already know. They're not really open to dialogue about it. I don't know about you guys, but so let's not go there. But what I mean is,
Go anywhere we want.
Yeah.
but if I'm teaching the possibility of climate change to students, I'm not going to tell them what I believe about it. I'm going to ask them, well, why do you make that assertion? You know, why do they think that this is happening and that is happening and so forth and so on? If philosophy for children, wherever it can unbias itself, in some areas that in the book I wrote, people bring down the walls. So that the classroom becomes a source of enlistment. You understand what I'm saying? And that then that damages people's willingness to allow philosophy to be involved with their kids. If they think somehow you're going to use that class as a way of, and actually this is what Weber was talking about, I think, where the classroom becomes a means of enlisting other people to your position. And there are some areas of life where that can happen. I think very difficult to remain.
Oh, yeah. In fact, in Savannah, when I was talking about the first concern of the group of parents who found out we were doing a philosophy for children workshop with teachers there, the first concern the parents had was they looked at some of the materials and they said one of them saw death mentioned in one of the novels, and they thought that we were going to use philosophy to make their kids believe certain things about death.
Yeah.
Right. So we're going to raise these philosophical issues, and then we're going to tell your kids what to think about each of these philosophical issues. And that was pretty easy to dismiss because we, just in the words that you're using, Terry, like we explained, that we're trying to do the opposite of that. And then, but the opposite of that was a problem for some other parents. Like we're trying to enable your children to think for themselves and think critically and, defend their own beliefs. And most parents wanted that, but a few parents said, no, I don't want that for my kids yet. I want to be able to tell my kids what to think. And yeah, I totally agree with you about teaching climate change. It doesn't matter what we believe. If the kids aren't coming to their own positions about climate change based on their own research and their own thinking, I think it just defeats itself. Whatever position you want them to take is going to be built on sand.
Well, or they'll never be presented with another point of view. And so.
And I mean, I do think one of the strengths of philosophy for children is that you are, you're both working out what you think, what your worldview is, but you're also being invited to grapple with different views, different perspectives, and to learn how to do that well, and to learn how to do that, graciously, but also with intelligence. I think that's rare that you're invited to hear, receive, and kind of engage with in a cooperative way different views, opposing views, views that aren't easily reconciled. And it's there in the novels, as much as it is in the community of inquiry. So important because, I don't know if there are too many venues in life where it's set up in that way that you can hear and respond to these different views, even some that you wouldn't have been exposed to unless you'd been introduced to the novel, unless you'd kind of expanded. That's one way anyway, to expand the views you're exposed to. I think, I'm just agreeing and echoing that thought. It's so integral to the practice.
Yeah, and even though the teacher becomes part of the community, that the teacher has to somehow remain aloof from favoring their view without asking, why do some people believe that other view? And so.
Yeah,
and
I think you have to.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, you go.
I'm good. Go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to say, like, you have to model holding those views, don't you? Like, so they learn something about what that's like.
Hmm.
You know, and how it might be possible that someone could do that.
Yeah. And I think we're all so different. I was thinking of, I think I could have done philosophy for children in the public school exactly the same I did it in my parochial settings. Because I wasn't interested in telling people what to believe.
Yeah.
But
Can I just say, I think people would be more surprised to hear you say it in the reverse, that the way people did philosophy, the way some people do philosophy with children in public schools, you would be doing it exactly the same way in a parochial setting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Well, in a parochial setting, I do have more latitude to say certain things or to bring in certain texts. But
that's true, yeah.
But it's just making them aware, this is what this says, or this is what that says.
Right.
But I can still ask the question, why do some people not agree? Or what does it mean to them?
Yeah.
And so that's what I was going to say, that when you respect the vulnerability of kids and enough to not want to impose your view on them, but let's take an issue like bullying, for example. I want to be against bullying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to leave that as, well, some people are so there are some issues where we're going to say, this is where I stand and why, but even having said that, that's not necessarily convince everybody.
Right.
But your teachers are going to take a stand in certain areas.
Yeah.
I think that's important too.
I do too. I completely do. But as you've been describing, it's not a dogmatic stand that you're taking. We want you to know what the school stands for, and I want you to know what I stand for, but I want you to think about it and come to, I want you to value it for your own reasons. And I'm going to share my reasons with you, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to invite criticism. Like, you're not going to become defensive or belligerent, or criticism isn't a way to. I mean, what they learn in the community of inquiry is that criticism doesn't shut down conversation. It's a driver. It moves it. I mean, if it's done appropriately, but it opens things up. So I think that's also a big difference. Like, yeah. So I think you invite it almost, but not in a gratuitous way, but just, we're all working this out. We're all, like you said, we're all coming to these views and revising them in light of the conversations that we have.
We're sort of
The
talking about the last several minutes we've been talking about how I was going to ask about how doing philosophy, like as philosophy with your students, spills over into other subject matters that you teach. And maybe that's a good segue to talk about your book.
yeah.
So here's your book. It's called, the title is Inviting Kids to Speak Their Minds, Essays on the Pedagogy of Asking. So please tell us about this.
Well, it's just another exercise in I've already mentioned a little bit. It's another exercise in helping students develop a voice, becoming persons, and the things that come out of a classroom. Yeah, it was an exploration of what comes out of a classroom when you actually do philosophy for children, and so you begin to recognize. First of all, there's not just a first of all, but for one thing, if you're going to do philosophy for children with kids, you have to allow a certain amount of chaos. For example, because kids are going to talk, they're going to talk over themselves, over one another sometimes. But a classroom that develops a community of inquiry, you have both chaos and resiliency working together. And that works whether I'm teaching whatever subject I'm teaching. Also, another big one was to always be aware that you have to respect the innocence of your kids by not imposing your beliefs, and because by innocence I mean you're open to new ideas, and you are open to considering the ideas of other people. Yeah. And then then there's this concept of the superfluous. This is why. See, what are the things we value the most is probably the things that we have the most fun doing, the superfluous things, and the things that don't seem to be needed. So I was trying to develop the idea that doing philosophy with kids it may seem superfluous, but that's because we value the quantitative over the qualitative sometimes. But that in fact, some people would say, but the most important thing is the superfluous, because that gives us a reason for living. It makes living enjoyable. So those were three chapters. And the other one was on leadership, and you have to have a leader in the classroom, and that leadership role does fall to some degree to the teacher. So even though the teacher joins the community, the teacher also adjudicates and tries to keep people from mistreating others or talking too much, et cetera, and so forth. So they're like can't think of a good word except you don't when you do philosophy for children, you don't step back and give up your leadership role totally, because the community won't allow that. So if you want to do it well, you have to have someone who's in a certain sense directing traffic. So, and at the same time, respecting deeply the nature of children and the unexpected nature of doing philosophy, which is an important part of building persons. And but then the other aspect of it was that this method of teaching is not a guarantee that you're going to produce moral people. Right. And so I use some examples that no pedagogy is a guarantee for producing the kind of world you would like to live in.
Yeah, that's important. What does the
Yeah.
Then it becomes a means to an end.
Oh, right. Yeah. I was just going to ask what that phrase, the pedagogy of asking, tell us what do you mean by that?
Because what the pedagogy of asking it's opposed to the pedagogy of telling.
I see.
So it's just in opposition to the idea that okay, kids, here's what you need to learn. Do these questions, read this book, listen to what I have to say. That's all telling. So pedagogy of asking is where you open every classroom open up to, well, what do you think about this? So you're developing voice, you're developing plausibility, you're developing a disposition to ask questions. You're developing a discernment of people who agree with you and don't disagree with you, and trying to accurately assess what other people believe. So this can happen in any subject matter. I happen to teach history, so it's easy. But if I taught math or science, I could do the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. I was going to ask, it just went out of my head. Oh, I was just going to bring it back to what you had said earlier about trust, how the students have to trust you. And the way you talk about leadership, trusting that there's somebody directing traffic, that I'm not going to get abused among my peers or the teachers out there to make things safe. But also, like talked about earlier, they trust that you're not going to impose your views, and yet they trust that you are sort of an expert on inquiry. So as contradictions arise, you're going to point those out if nobody points them out. If things come up and reasons are not being given, or there are sloppy reasons, as the expert of inquiry, you're going to point that out. You're going to bring some kind of discipline around inquiry that doesn't direct it toward one answer or the other, but just makes it rigorous, makes it have integrity as inquiry, right? And that's a trust that they develop in you.
Yeah, it's a transaction. It's a relational thing. I don't like the word expert. Cause I don't. Do you guys ever blow it when you're in front of the class?
Only every other time, if not more.
So, but sometimes I'll come back the next day and say, I think now I understand what you were talking about. So some of these conversations, matter of fact, I've had situations where I can pick up a conversation with a student I had several years ago. And so in a way, the conversation doesn't end. You're not bringing it to a conclusion in many ways.
That's nice.
And so it's a style, it's a method, it's a openness, it's an invitation, and I'm very grateful. It partly, I suppose, my personality, but I think I'm really was fortunate to, I have a lot to be thankful for Dale opening that up, and then again, despite who I was, always felt very accepted in philosophy for children, starting in the 90s with Matt and Ann and my fellow students and the other professors. Because I was on board with what they were doing.
And you're coming up on retirement, is that right? The end of this school year?
Yep, I got another 6 weeks or so.
And so how many years have you been teaching altogether? Have you counted?
57. And
it's so tremendous, Terry.
And yeah, 22 years in Oregon and 35 years here.
Wow. And think of the thousands of students that you've touched.
Well, think of the thousands of students who've touched me. We're a drop in the bucket in many ways. But you see, I would often say, man, this teaching philosophy of children, that makes teaching a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, passing this test.
Yeah.
It's much more, it fits our anthropology. It's who we are. I like that phrase. Yeah. I like the phrase anthropology.
I like that too. What are your plans for post-retirement?
Well, my wife Annette and I we're planning right now. Our daughter's been in France for about 40 years, I think. So we have a lot of grandkids and great grandkids over there. So our plan right now is to move to France for 1 year.
Oh, fantastic.
Then figure things out and probably come back and figure things out. So.
Wow.
You'll have a lovely year.
What an adventure.
What a treat.
So. I was just going to say regarding France what before, and Megan, you can correct me. My impression is that throughout Europe and a lot of Latin America, where philosophy has been a high school subject forever, for centuries,
Yeah.
it is almost always the history of philosophy, the way you described.
Yeah.
But that there have been people, largely philosophy for children people, and then a few other people from outside philosophy for children, who have tried to bring our approach or something like our approach into the required high school curriculum of philosophy in those countries, but it's the exception. And Daniela Cami was able to do that at the University of Graz. Have people in her program start to teach their mandatory philosophy courses in the high schools with that approach, but it's the exception.
Yeah.
You think,
Well,
Megan?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a great sort of overview of the situation.
In general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fun.
No, there are, when you take a degree program, you're trying to become something, but it's in philosophy where you become someone. You're supposed to. Sorry, but in the Book of Psalms, it says, "Ye are gods," and in fact, we are.
Nice.
The image of God.
Mm.
So that's what I mean by our anthropology. Life is filled with wonder.
Mm.
And to be able to express it and encourage others to get them thinking about it and asking questions.
Mm.
I still remember Goethe, who he had some good thoughts, but I think he was into naturalism.
He did say it was non-reductive naturalism, though.
He had some very good thoughts. He certainly did.
Yeah,
No,
I think yeah.
I was good. Have you ever heard of Ortega y Gasset?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. He's got a lot of cool stuff to say too about what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And
He has.
I just started a book on the spiritual, what's it called? Spiritualities associated with liberation theology and liberation philosophy in Latin America.
yeah.
It's a great book. And the chapter on Freire, I'm learning all kinds of new things about how, Freire's emphasis on becoming more human, and that's the whole education is to help us become more human. And when he said that, it was inflected with his religious upbringing. That he didn't write about it explicitly in his books on education. He sort of sidelined his religious views, but they were motivated by his religious views of what that meant.
Yeah, I was introduced to him when I was at Oregon College of Education.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well,
This has been wonderful. Thanks for taking so much time with us, Terry. This
yeah,
thoroughly
thank you,
enjoyable.
Terry. Yeah, very, very nourishing and
I remember some of our discussions, and I wrote a lot of stuff on pragmatism and the preference of pragmatists for Mon, and a lot about Goethe and naturalism with Megan. And do you know what a clownfish can do that other fish can't do?
Oh, what?
They can swim among it's a plant that stings. They can,
the anemones, yeah.
Yeah, and without they can stung themselves. So if you have a pretty solid worldview, then I can read Rorty and Nietzsche and not be stung. because
I
all I
love
want to know is where in the world are they getting this
it.
from?
Yeah.
And so they don't threaten me, you understand?
Nice.
I
Yeah.
want to know why people think the way they do. It's just a fantastic thing. And people like you and what Matt developed and Ann.
Well, Terry, you're such a credit to the program. The everything you've contributed to it and what you've done with it, it's remarkable. So thank you for sharing that with us again today.
Good luck on your project. And what are you writing 2 books in a certain sense? One on Matt and one on the program?
Someone else has a book intended on the history of the program that they will be using these oral histories to help them do that. Yeah.
And then you guys are writing a book on
Matt.
Okay, gotcha. Right. Okay, cool. I'd like to.
We did one on Ann Sharp because unfortunately she died before she had a chance to put her stuff together and put a book out. So we edited a book of Ann's things, and then from then we decided to go on and do more.
Tell me real quick, did Ann, Matt kind of got, his testimony was the 60s riots at Columbia. He's teaching and he realizes waiting till college to teach philosophy is too late. That's sort of what I believe hearing him say. So we've got to teach kids how to think younger. And so at what point did Ann join in that project? Right at the beginning, or?
Go for it, Megan.
Well, I was actually just thinking what we could do maybe is send Terry the PDF of the introduction to our book on Anne, because the introduction tells some of her history, Terry, which isn't as familiar to a lot of people who studied with her and worked with her. And we try and talk about how, she joins Montclair in 1972. Is that correct? No, 3. Matt joins in 1972. She joins in 1973, and they meet in 1973.
Okay.
And it sort of goes from there. But Anne has her own story of kind of, she taught in all Black colleges. She was involved in a Shaker community. Her and her husband were, I think, sort of house. No, that was and then there was there was a home for boys in Massachusetts. So it's a really interesting journey because it's as if they were meant to meet when they did meet, given their their experiences were very different, but it just meant that when they met, there was so much energy that they had around philosophy for children. Maureen's got a far better memory than I have for detail.
That's a good summary. Yeah. And they co-founded the Institute in 1974.
Oh, they co-founded. Okay, cool.
They did. And part of the great combination was that Matt was in the philosophy department, philosophy and religion department, and Ann's degree was in education, so she was in the College of Ed. So they complemented each other so well that way, professionally.
Well, thank you. And if you see Dave, tell him hi for me.
Sure will. Yeah.
Thanks for honoring me by asking me to be interviewed. So
thank you so much, Terry. Have fun in France. Good luck, and stay in touch with us. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.